Today I'm privileged to have a guest on the show, and she's going to start by reading a little piece of her book.
This is from my new book called The Gift of Change, Spiritual Guidance for a Radically New Life. While there are hate-filled people planning ways to sow violence and destruction on earth, God has a blueprint for creating peace on earth. It's not a physical blueprint, but rather a plan that exists in His mind, pieces of it already to be downloaded into the mind of anyone who asks to receive his or her part. Each of us carries maximal potential to be used by God to heal the world. He has a plan, and it cannot not work.
And that's Marianne Williamson, best-selling author of Return to Love and Everyday Grace, reading from her new book, The Gift of Change, Spiritual Guidance for a Radically New Life. And it's an honor and a delight to be with you again, Marianne.
Thank you.
So, this book, as I mentioned to you before the show, I felt it could have been titled Spiritual Activism, because it talks about a whole different way of changing the world, a way that involves spiritual growth, as opposed to marching or protesting against external conditions. Would you comment on that?
Well, I do believe that, as I talk about in the book, invoking the world we want is a lot more powerful than trying to destroy the world that we don't want. But at the same time, I don't say in my speaking or in my writing that it is never appropriate to protest or march, etc. I think sometimes it is important to protest external conditions, just as it's important in our own personal lives to take care of certain situations that should no longer exist. So I don't see spiritual growth as a substitute for handling what needs to be handled on the earth plane.
I think where you're coming from, though, in the book, is that it's more about, though, knowing where you're coming from when you make that choice.
Well, consciousness is creator. So ultimately, everything we do is infused with the consciousness with which we do it. So if we are not lifted in consciousness, then we can only come up with temporary solutions and changes anyway.
Now, do we have a sense that can recognize the lift? Can you recognize when you're being lifted in consciousness? And can you recognize when you're being dragged down in consciousness by the choice you're making?
Yes, inner peace.
So it's actually looking within to recognize that sense.
For me, it's not about looking within to recognize the sense. It's about practicing the principles that bring about the experience. If my heart is open to you, if I'm giving to you and seeing how I might be there for you, rather than having my heart closed, withholding my love, thinking all about me and my agenda, that's a choice which way to be. The first will produce peace, the second will not. If I take a cynical attitude, if I take an attitude about limited possibility, I'm blocking the miracle. I will not know peace. If I stand in any situation and claim the greater life that is already available for me, because there is no spot where God is not, and just choose to experience it and know that it is there and ask for the eyes with which to see it and the ears with which to hear it, I will know peace. So you begin to realize that peace is an inside job. And if I want inner peace, I can only get that through the proper use of my own inner resources. I think where most people stand is that we're at the effect of the freneticism of this world. This world is so chaotic and so frenetic and moving so fast. But the problem is, when the world is changing as fast as it is today, the only way that you can live an empowered life within that is if you personally are grounded in those things that do not change.
Well, you talk about in the book, The Gift of Change, spiritual guidance for a radically new life. You talk about what happened to you when you were basically discovered by Oprah, and how the whirlwind of the success track took hold. And it reminded me of experiences of my own. And sort of the line that's been going through my head is that if the ego finds that it can't defeat you in failure, it will try to defeat you through success.
And that's a really interesting point. It's true. It's true. And that story in the book, of course, is about a time when my life changed so quickly. And in looking back, I realized that I allowed the speed and the kind of outer glamour of those changes to pull me away from my center in ways that I would come to regret. Mm-hmm.
So what have you learned about the I don't like using the word resistance, but resisting the temptation for glamorous hypnosis.
Well, I think that spiritual practice is a lot like physical exercise. You build your muscles. You build your muscles. You know, the other day, speaking of Oprah, I was reading in her magazine an interview with Barack Obama, the new senator from Illinois. And his wife was there with him for the interview, and Oprah asked him, how are you dealing with this? Overnight you became a household name. And his wife said something about, well, we know how important it is that we remain very prayerful.
And humble.
And humble. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what she said. And in the Course in Miracles, it talks about developing certain mental habit patterns that become your problem-solving repertoire. And that's the thing. If life is changing, if life is getting really good or life is getting really challenging, either way, you develop the muscle. I will meditate today. I will pray about this.
Okay.
I will open my heart to the people around me.
You become religious.
You become religious. That's exactly
So where
right.
do you think is a bigger challenge, the bottom dropping out or the ceiling flying away?
Well, the bottom dropping out, obviously.
You do? You think that's a harder challenge?
Well, of course.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, if you tell me, I have a book that's number one, that's not nearly as challenging as if you tell me the World Trade Centers were hit. I mean, one involves human suffering and one doesn't. It would be very, very narcissistic to make good things happening in my life seem to be the biggest cosmic challenge that I face.
But don't you think that anything that pulls you away from your sense of divine presence is the tragedy?
Well, but I think for me, good things happening in my life, all I have to do is remind myself. Whereas when bad things happen, you have to do more than remind yourself. Sometimes standing in faith takes some real effort.
And, I just want to follow this a little bit further. Because what I have found in my life is that, each prepares you for each. Defeat prepares you for victory, and victory prepares you for defeat. If you're willing to learn the lessons, if you lose your balance in defeat, you're going to lose your balance in victory. And that's probably what brought you to defeat in the first place, is that lack of balance. You're getting to see what toppled you when you're starting to lose. And if you can stand strong in that fire and allow it to be there, and keep look at life through the eyes of faith, or as you put in the book, through the eyes of love, and then you realize that all your fears are imaginary and illusory, I think that starts to send you upward. But then you have those temptations again, when everything is offered to you that you used to desire and had to forego. Is this making sense?
Well, except the only thing is, I really loved the first part you were saying about defeat, going through the burn, standing within that space, learning what you need to learn, which I talk quite a bit about in the book, and how that leads to a greater victory. But I think once you have faced a level of defeat, particularly if you feel that it's because you failed to be humble enough, the next time you're in victory, you're not going to forget that.
Right.
So
that's the value.
That's the value, exactly.
That's the value. I wanted to sort of create a brief synopsis of your book, and I'd like you to comment on it, and then we'll see where we go from there. What occurred to me was the solution to your every problem is to ask yourself, how can I be more loving? The solution to every problem facing the world is to ask yourself, how can I be more loving? To make more money, to heal the sick, to usher in miracles. Ask yourself, how can I be more loving?
Well, I wrote the book, so obviously I'm hoping that it comes across to the reader as a little bit more than that. There is a basic theme to the book.
That's more than that.
I don't know. All that's been said before. There's a basic theme in the book
believe in myself.
that I'm dealing with, yes. And that is that. Well, as you said, the book just got sent to you, but. The theme the principle I was particularly intrigued with in writing this book is this idea, the first line in the Course in Miracles is that there is no order of difficulty in miracles. And the Course in Miracles says that the answer to every problem emerges in the mind of God the moment the problem occurs. And I was very intrigued by how that principle would apply to the World Trade Center bombings. And if you follow that line of thinking, we look at something like the World Trade Center disaster and the phenomenon of terrorism, And we say, what are we going to do about it? But the metaphysical seeker knows that the deeper question is, who am I going to be within this experience? Because my own transformation as I dwell within this experience will be the transformative element on the level of cause and thus on the level of effect.
Because we're connected to the world.
Well, the world is simply a reflection of our thoughts.
Okay.
As the Course in Miracles says, an idea cannot leave its source. So, as I see it, the moment the World Trade Centers fell, there was born in the mind of God a plan for your life and a plan for mine and a plan for everyone's life, should we choose to follow it. That it would be etched on each of our hearts, available to each of us, like a file you can download if you choose. And in this plan, you become very quickly as possible, the man you are capable of being. I become as quickly as possible the woman I am capable of being. We rise to levels of intelligence, insight, style, courage, talent, etc. And we then meet each other on those levels of interconnection by which we then achieve, in ways we would not even have thought possible, the great moral mission of our generation, and that's to literally save the earth in time.
So you make it sound like it was a spiritual catalyst.
Well, everything in life is a spiritual catalyst if we allow it to be. And you and I have already discussed the fact that that's as true of our defeats as it is of our victories. That was a very painful moment in American history, but all of us, we were there. It was also a moment of great spiritual fertility. Because when our collective heart broke, and as it did so, our collective mind opened. I mean, the average person was asking profound questions. Why are we hated? The average American wanted to know what has been our foreign policy over the last few decades. The whole world, their heart, not all of the world, but more of the world than usual, had its heart open to the United States. We felt like a nation. And then, of course, we went militaristic. We took our leadership, led us in a completely different direction. Everybody's supposed to just be a cheerleader for revenge. Don't ask any deep questions. You'll be labeled unpatriotic if you do. But in that moment, it was clear that this tragedy gave us an opportunity. This crisis was indeed an opportunity.
Oh, I think it gave people a taste of unity that they had never had before.
And that unity is our authentic state. And whether you're talking about a collective or an individual, when you are in your authentic state, miracles occur naturally.
There's a symbol of a tower coming down that represents the falling of the ego.
In the tarot, yeah. Fascinating. I hadn't even thought about that in terms of the tower. Absolutely. Well, in the tower it symbolizes it's such a yang element, unbalanced by yin.
Yeah, it was strange. Back in 1975 or thereabouts, I was living in New York at the time, and I just had the strongest sense that the towers had to come down. There was something profoundly unnatural about them, and I actually, for the second time in my life, I actually had a vision. And I was in Prospect Park in Brooklyn, New York, and they came down, and I wept.
It's interesting that you say that. I did not have a vision like that, but although I've lived in New York for years off and on, and quite a bit during the 70s, I never went there. There was some force field that kept me from.
Well, it was repulsive. There. I mean, it was the artificiality of the structure at that particular time when values were starting to shift. And I think now your book is definitely on the pulse. I'm meeting people who are coming to the conclusion that I came to from reading your book, which is, and again, maybe this is simplistic, but it's that we're getting to realize that there are certain things going on in the world right now that we need to let go of. We need to turn it over to a higher power. Something
has to die in order for something else to be born.
So sometimes not fighting against the status quo is not necessarily retreating from the battle. It's more or less recognizing that now it's time for us to turn that over to a higher force, and we need to become channels individually for that higher force to come in by fulfilling our spiritual potential.
Yeah, but if you look at Hinduism, for instance, the destroyer and the creator are flip sides of the same divine being. And I think, even when you look at the tower card, so it's the tower, which is the ego burning, But all of that symbol is within yourself, and I think the fire is within yourself too. So, and you look at birth. You keep talking about something being born. Well, I've given birth. Birth is messy. Birth is an aggressive act. Birth has its own violence to it. I mean, there is a destruction of one thing in order for something else to be born. And I believe that in the new thought, new age, higher consciousness, whatever we want to call it, community, there is an underappreciation of that leads to this kind of wimpy, all we have to do is love and everything will be okay. And then you don't really look at some of the things that need to be looked at.
Are you suggesting, and I never thought of it this way, and by the way, you're listening to Bob Lanter's Parenting Solutions, and we are having a conversation with the delightful of the light Marianne Williamson, best-selling author of the new book, The Gift of Change, Spiritual Guidance for a Radically New Life. Highly recommend it. It just occurred to me as you were talking that, and this can certainly be taken absolutely wrong in the media, which is, famous for that, but that it's almost like a birth into higher consciousness is responsible for what happened, not some enemy who hates us out there, that there's some sort of destruction that has to take...
I see what you're saying.
And it's kind of a whole new look at it, and it places light back in charge.
Well, that remains to be seen. It can. I'm not sure. Well, it depends on what we do with it. This is, I hear where you're coming from, and I'm reminded of a line in the Course in Miracles where it says, "It is not up to you what you learn. It is merely up to you whether you learn through joy or through pain." So in that sense, what you said would mean it is time for us to evolve into a higher state of consciousness, and whatever it's going to take to wake us up is going to happen. Mm-hmm. But I do believe that nature has a compassionate plan. My fear about 9/11 is that although right after it happened, there was this profound and fertile unified moment, we didn't take that road. We took another road. We went deeper into fear, brute force, top down, etc. And so what that means is basically, if you take a lesson that is presented to you, well, this is true whether you're a nation or an individual, and you take it as a reason to close your heart rather than love your heart, open your heart, that means the lesson's going to come around again, and it will be even louder.
You're so right.
And that's what
I so agree with
brings
you.
me great sadness.
I so agree with you. But what it reminded me of is the process of falling in love. When you fall in love with someone, it teaches you how you want to feel, and then you go on the spiritual path to stay there. And so that moment of unity taught us how to feel. And see, what I feel happens when people fall in love is the reason why they lose that energy is because their old habitual unloving patterns start to take back over.
Of course.
And that's exactly what happened in America. That this unity, the patterns of division just automatically just started kicking in. And division, that same attitude that divides America divides marriages. They have 50% divorce rate.
But this didn't happen by accident. This was, talk about a top-down pronouncement. The American leadership, namely the American president, spoke into that view. He spoke the view of fear, axis of evil, we're going to kill them. If you're not for us, you're against us. All of that stuff. No, we're not responsible at all. They just hate us because we're good. You just go shop and we'll take care of this. That the energy around such thought forms was harnessed. That's why the power of leadership. So, throughout history, you can look at the difference individuals make. It's very interesting to ask yourself, what if we had a president with a different kind of consciousness after 9/11? People aren't even seemingly remembering it now, but at the time, there was a debate about whether or not this should even be contextualized as war. Many suggested it should be contextualized as an international criminal element that needed to be dealt with by the international community. That's a whole different context for that experience, leading to different thought forms, leading to different energies. So where we went was not accidental. Someone named it. Someone spoke into that. And personally, I think that was tragic, and we'll see what happens now.
Yeah, well, I look at world events the way I look at events in my own personal life, and
as do I.
It's about what is it, what am I being told from deep within that I have to do about it, that I have to do about my life, that I have to do. And, I just find myself concentrating, not in terms of self-interest, not in terms of personal agenda, but just in terms of fulfilling my potential in the moment with those who I'm with, as the way to be at this time in history. That's how I feel.
Well, I think that I totally agree with that. And this is not a but, this is an and. There's a line in the Course in Miracles where it says, the closer you grow to God, the closer you grow to your natural talent at protecting your brother. So this is how I see it as a Course in Miracles student. What you just said, absolutely true. Your job in any given moment is to simply be with the person you're with, the situation you're with as open heart as possible. Now, the plan, God's plan, is such that as you do that in ways you could not consciously understand mortally with your mortal mind, it is preparing you further to take a bigger role by definition.
That's true.
I mean, you could even look at your radio show like that. The more present you are with your guest, the
true.
better radio show you're going to have. The better radio show you're going to have, the more effect you'll have on the more people.
I'm telling you, you are as accurate as any mathematician. I'm serious because,
well,
I mean,
you.
seriously, since I've started that focus, some really huge doors have been opening.
Of course, and
For
that
me
is
to have a louder voice.
That's right. That's because today, if you want to go wide, you have to go deep.
Well, that's why I was asking you earlier, because I'm looking for preparation. That's why I was talking to you about the pitfalls of fame. That's where I was coming from. I was asking you for advice. I was doing it in a
Well, once again, remember what Michelle Obama
time.
said, be prayerful and be humble.
Yeah, no, and I remember what you said, be religious. Mm-hmm. Be religious.
Actually, you said it, but I agreed.
Well, you brought me to the conclusion. We've obviously been really close to eternity because the time has flown by so amazingly fast. But really, being with you is really heavenly.
Thank
you.
And
I want to thank you so much. I know you've taken a lot of blows along the way, and you're still in there duking it out and being real.
Thank you.
That's really cool.
Thank you.
If people want to contact you or get more information about your work,
www.marianne.com, and I'm doing some really exciting things. If you go through my website, you can go into something called the Miracle Matrix. People can download my tapes on your iPod or MP3 player. Lots going on. And, of course, my book. I hope if there's anyone listening who would be served by the book, I hope they find it.
Oh, I think the whole world is going to be served by the book.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for today.